Erin from Morehouse Farm here with today's knitting tip. We are going to join this knitting to this piece of knitting seamlessly so it doesn't even look like we did any sewing. And in order to set this up, we did a provisional cast on. We used a crochet hook cast on so that we ended up with some scrap yarn here and some live stitches. And first we need to undo that so that we can grab these live stitches to have them to work with. Now, the first thing is it's really important to understand where and what our stitches were made of. And you can see where the light blue intersects the oatmeal, that's my stitch. And you can either undo them and then pick them up or pick them up as you're undoing them. Totally up to you. If you're a little bit nervous, go ahead and pull them out and pick them up at the same time. So there's one, and you'll see this unzips pretty easily. There's two, there's a third, there's a fourth, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and what about this guy on the side? All right, let's grab it, because the thing to remember about this stitch is we were knitting in this direction. So when we cast on 10 stitches, we're now picking up the loops in between, right? What was a stitch when we were knitting in this direction, okay, is now the loop in between the stitch, right? That was a stitch, that was a stitch, right? So what we need to do now is join these stitches to these stitches, and we want it to fit like a zipper. So one, then in the middle, one, then in the middle. And the reason I put this on a cable rather than another needle is so many of these Kitchener stitch videos talk to you about purling on and knitting off and that kind of stuff. But notice how the stitches sit sideways? When they're flat, they look like horseshoes. And that's why I think it's just so much easier to do this from the cable of a circular needle so that you can see which way the stitches actually lie. So the idea is, see how this is like a little horseshoe? And the one next to it as well? What we're going to do is we are going to take the yarn and create a loop like this, and then the bar in between, another loop like this, the bar in between, the loop like this, but we're going to catch these stitches at the same time so that they join together again like a zipper. So the first one is always the trickiest one because it's this edge stitch. And what I've noticed here as I pull the needles down to the edge is that each loop is coming out of the loop below it. So in order to make these two line up, what I'm going to do is want this stitch to come out of the one below it. And I want to make sure it's oriented properly so it's not twisted. And I'm just going to slide my one needle into the other. Okay, this is the live edge from the provisional cast on. This is the edge from my live knitting where I finished. And because I have my working yarn here ready to go on my needle, all I'm going to do is come up through the bottom stitch as well as the top stitch. And then I'm going to come back down through the bottom stitch. And what that's going to do is just pull this in ever so slightly. So when I pull out the needles from this stitch, look at that edge is going to continue. Sure, it's not quite as even yet because we're not working on tension. I'll straighten that out at the end, not to worry. All right, next we want to zipper this one in between this one, then this one in between this one, and so forth. So we are going to grab this stitch and we want it to make it look like it lies flat. So we're going to come up through the bottom, and then we're going to work our way up to create a loop here. I do need to grab the edge. All right. And then I'm going to come back to front through this next stitch as well. Okay, and you may find it easier to get rid of the needles altogether and just be sewing with live stitches. Totally up to you. But if I could hold this flat, I would be able to show you. And as this one comes up, now it's creating what looks like a loop. Okay, so now back down to the one we just grabbed. And again, now we're front to back because we're trying to mimic these loops from the bottom side. Okay, so we see our horseshoe there. Now when I come to the next stitch, right, I want to connect the two with a bar. So from behind, I will come up through this stitch, and see how tricky that is on a needle because it's turned sideways? If I pull the cord out, I'll see that's flat. Now I'm going to have to work with the cord in the way, but I can see that I need to go back to front here. And this is why I actually find it easier to get rid of the needles altogether when I'm doing Kitchener stitch. All right, now we need to go up and do the reverse on this side, which is down through the front of this stitch and come back up through front to back to front, sorry, on this stitch. And again, see, it's twisted sideways, so that's really tricky to tell when it's on the needle. If we can flip this so that it is flat and you can see that horseshoe, right? We want to come back to front because that's what a knit stitch is going to look like. All right, so I actually am going to get rid of these needles, and I know there's going to be a few gasps in the crowd, but it's just so much easier to see without them in the way, I think. All right, so we've come up from the middle here on the top side. We need to come and grab this stitch on the bottom side. So see how that's laying flat? We're going front to back, then back to front on the next one. Okay, come back up. We're going in the front and then back to front on this one. Okay, again, front to back to front, because again, we're mimicking what these stitches are doing in the row below. You've got a loop and then the bar between them and then the loop. We're doing the same thing with our yarn here. Oops. Okay, we gotta go grab the one on this side and then the next one, because that bar is what we're creating between those two stitches when we do this. Okay, and then I'm coming back down to the bottom ones. So this one and this one need to be connected. And really the trick is, you'll hear so many Kitchener stitch videos talking about knitting on and purling off, but all that means is you're putting your darning needle through back to front or front to back. And the key is the first stitch you go front to back when you're talking about a stitch knitting laying flat, and then back to front on the second one, because you're always grabbing them in pairs. Okay, same thing here. We're going front to back and then back to front. And notice my stitches aren't going anywhere. Right? And that's looking like some pretty awesome knitting all the way up, isn't it? Okay, back to this stitch and this stitch. Front to back to front. And then this stitch, back to front to back. And you'll see every stitch gets worked twice. And that's the beauty of that loop. So if I have a loop here, it comes out, goes back in. Just like all the other ones. So we're coming up to the end here, which is kind of exciting. And yeah, there's a lot of ends in the way, but it's pretty darn exciting. I haven't even monkeyed with any of the tension yet, and it looks pretty darn good. So this one, because That was the stitch I worked on the last row. Then we're going to grab this one here and see how this one sits. I think it looks better this way, so we'll grab it there. Okay, coming back up to this one. And then all of a sudden, here I am at the edge again. So I'm going to work that one actually twice because I want to make sure that I've got my little zipper action going. And we need to go back into this stitch, make it flat, grab our edge stitch. And again, same idea. Let's see how these sit together, right? We want it to look like the top is coming out of the bottom. We do already have, though, one little crossover from before, so I'm just going to go back down through here. And then I'm going to put my yarn through to the back side, and now I can darn it in. And that is how you do a Kitchener stitch. Happy knitting from Morehouse Farm.